My name is Elena Morrison. I'm 28 years old, and I've never been allowed to cry. Not once. Tears were weakness, my father would say, his voice cutting through any hint of emotion like a blade through silk. Compliance was strength, obedience was survival. And survival, in the Morrison household, meant becoming invisible until called upon, perfect when examined, and silent when suffering. Senator Richard Morrison didn't have time for a daughter who might embarrass him with displays of human frailty. He had a career to build, a legacy to cement, and a public image that demanded perfection from every member of his family. My mother, Margaret, had learned this lesson long before I was born. She moved through our marble-floored mansion like a ghost, beautiful and hollow, her smile practiced and empty, the first memory I have of truly understanding my place in this. World was at a campaign fundraiser when I was 8. I'd been dressed in a white ruffled dress that scratched against my skin, my hair pulled back so tightly it gave me a headache. When tears came from the bright camera flashes, my father pulled me aside. "What did I tell you about crying?" His voice was low, controlled, but I could hear the fury beneath it. "That it's not allowed," I whispered. "That's right. Morrisons don't cry. We don't show weakness. We don't give our enemies ammunition to use against us." From that moment forward, I learned to swallow every tear, to bury every emotion so deep that even I couldn't find them sometimes. I became exactly what he wanted, a perfect, compliant daughter who never caused problems, never asked for too much, and never, ever cried. The years blurred together in a haze of piano recitals, etiquette lessons, and charity galas. I excelled in school because failure wasn't an option. I learned to play tennis, to speak French, to navigate social situations. With the poise of someone twice my age, I was a masterpiece of social engineering, crafted to serve one purpose: making Senator Morrison look like a successful family man. But masterpieces are fragile things. The first crack appeared during my junior year in the form of Mrs. Henderson, my English literature teacher. She treated me like a human being, pushing me to think critically, to express opinions beyond memorization and regurgitation. "What do you think Sylvia Plath was really trying to say about societal expectations of women?" she asked during a discussion of the bell jar. I gave the expected answer, the safe answer. "That's the textbook answer, Elena. But what do you think?" Not what you're supposed to think, but what you actually feel about it. For the first time in my life, I found myself wanting to say something true. The words were right there, pressing against my lips like caged birds desperate for freedom. But I remembered my father's warnings about weakness and swallowed the truth along with everything else. Asterisk. The second crack came with David Chen, who transferred to Westbridge mid-semester from public school. He was everything I wasn't supposed to notice: scholarship student, quiet, more interested in books than social climbing. "You don't have to pretend to be perfect all the time," he said one afternoon. It must be exhausting. The words hit me like a physical blow. No one had ever suggested that perfection might be a burden. "I don't know what you mean," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "I've been watching you in class, and you always have the right answer, the safe answer. But sometimes I catch you looking like you want to say something completely different." When he asked about my real thoughts on a history assignment, something in his expression stopped me from giving another non-answer. I thought it was interesting how history is written by the winners, and we never really talk about what the colonists lost in the process. The stability, the protection, the certainty of knowing your place in the world. David smiled. "See? That's what I was waiting for. That's the real Elena talking." The real Elena, the phrase echoed in my mind. I had been so focused on being the perfect Elena that I had forgotten there might be a real one hiding underneath. My relationship with David grew more intimate. more dangerous. We would meet in quiet corners of the library, in empty classrooms, anywhere we could talk without being observed. He told me about his dreams of becoming a journalist. I found myself sharing thoughts I had never dared voice before. Do you ever think about what you would do if you weren't Senator Morrison's daughter? He asked one afternoon. I can't think about that, I replied automatically, but I was lying. I had been thinking about it constantly, but if you could be anyone, do anything, what would you choose? I think I would like to travel. Not to political summits or campaign events, but just to see the world. To go somewhere where no one knows who I am or what I'm supposed to be. Where would you go first? Italy, maybe, Tuscany. I've seen pictures of the countryside there. It looks like a place where you could just exist without having to justify your existence to anyone. Before I could explore this thought further, my phone rang. My mother's voice brought me crashing back to reality. College plans. Dinner with the family. My future planned and packaged and delivered to me like a meal I hadn't ordered. Asterisk, the spring gala arrived like an execution date. I stood in my emerald green silk dress, chosen to complement my father's campaign colors. Jonathan Whitman arrived precisely on time, his conversation as predictable as sunrise. As we moved through the ballroom, I played my part in there carefully. Choreographed performance. Then I saw David by the service entrance, wearing a borrowed tuxedo that didn't quite fit. He'd convinced his uncle, who worked for the catering company, to let him help serve. When he motioned toward a side door, I followed despite every instinct screaming that this was dangerous. What are you doing here? I whispered on the balcony. I watched you in there, Elena. You looked like you were dying a slow death by politeness. This is my life. These are my people. Are they? Because from where I was standing, it looked like you were performing for them, not living with them. When he asked about my favorite color, I found myself whispering, blue. Not the navy blue my mother picks out for me, but the color of the ocean right before a storm. Deep and wild and dangerous. It was a small rebellion, but it was mine. Asterisk, the weeks following brought increasing turmoil. My father announced his campaign for governor, raising the stakes impossibly higher. Suddenly, our house was filled with staffers and consultants. I was no longer just a daughter expected to comply. I was now a symbol, a living representation of political ideals I had never been asked to embrace. My relationship with David became increasingly clandestine. We could no longer meet openly, resorting to brief encounters in empty hallways and encrypted messages. This is insane, David said when we managed to steal 10 minutes alone in the school's old photography darkroom. You're living like a prisoner. I'm living like a governor's daughter, I corrected. Is that what you want to be for the rest of your life? A political accessory? Before I could respond, Mrs. Henderson found us. Instead of marching us to the principal's office, she led us to her empty classroom. Elena, do you remember our conversation about the bell jar? About what you really thought versus what you were supposed to think? She spoke about students who struggle with the difference between who they are and who they're expected to be. What? Your feeling isn't uncommon, Elena. The desire to be authentic, to make your own choices, to discover who you might be if you weren't carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations. Then she asked the question that would change everything. Elena, what do you want? Not what you're supposed to want, but what would make you feel like you're living authentically? The words poured out of me like water through a broken dam. I want to travel. To see the world, not through political necessity, but just to experience it. I want to study art history, maybe, or literature. I want to fall in love with someone I choose. I want to make mistakes and learn from them. I want to cry when I'm sad and laugh when I'm happy without calculating the political impact first. By the time I finished, tears were streaming down my face, the first real tears I had shed in years. "Now," Mrs. Henderson said quietly, "you need to decide if you're brave enough to fight for those things." That night, I wrestled with Mrs. Henderson's challenge. Was I brave enough to fight for what I wanted? The next morning brought news that would test my resolve. My father announced we would host a major campaign fundraiser at our home, and Jonathan Whitman would be my date for the evening. "It would be beneficial for the two of you to be seen together," my father said, his tone carrying that weight that meant this was non-negotiable. I understood that this was the moment the cage door was beginning to swing shut, that the choices being made now would determine the shape of my entire future. When David asked me to meet him after school, I knew it was a risk, but I needed to see him. He was waiting with a college brochure. This was a program at the University of Florence, art history and cultural studies, with an emphasis on Renaissance literature and painting. It's a 2-year program, and they accept American students. I stared at the images of ancient buildings and sun-drenched courtyards. It was everything I had described wanting: travel, art, literature, the chance to discover who I might be away from political expectations. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you talked about Italy, about wanting to go somewhere where no one knows who you are." "This could be that place. David, this is fantasy. I can't just move to Italy to study art history. I have obligations, responsibilities, but what about who you actually are?" The brochure felt heavy in my hands, weighted with possibilities that seemed both thrilling and terrifying. The fundraiser loomed closer, and with it, the feeling that my life was reaching a point of no return. The guest list included the most influential political figures in the state, and my role was being meticulously planned down to the smallest detail. New dress, perfect hair, flawless performance as the ideal political daughter during a family strategy meeting. My father outlined expectations that felt more like a prison sentence than party planning. "Elena, you'll be introduced to several important families tonight. The Whitmans, obviously, but also the Aldriches and the Pemberton clan. These connections will be crucial for your future, both personally and professionally." Personally and professionally. As if there were no distinction between Elena, the person, and Elena, the political asset. I found myself studying my parents during these meetings, really looking at them for the first time in years. My mother, once vibrant and opinionated according to old family photos, now moved through conversations with practiced responses. Her authenticity buried so deep, I wondered if it still existed. Had she made a choice similar to the one I was facing? Had she chosen compliance over authenticity? And was this hollow perfection the inevitable result? My father, meanwhile, had become so consumed by his political persona that I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen him display genuine emotion. Even his affection for me felt calculated, measured against its potential impact on his career. The night before the fundraiser, I couldn't sleep. I stood at my bedroom window, looking out at the manicured gardens that surrounded our house, and felt like I was viewing my life from the outside. Everything was beautiful, everything was perfect, and everything felt completely artificial. My phone buzzed with a message from David. "Remember what you told Mrs. Henderson about what you want. Remember that your life belongs to you." The message should have comforted me, but instead it filled me with a kind of desperate panic, because I could feel the moment approaching when I would have to choose between the life I had been given and the life I might create for myself. And despite all my growing awareness, despite David's encouragement and Mrs. Henderson's wisdom, I wasn't sure I had the courage to choose authenticity over security. The fundraiser arrived with the fanfare of a state dinner. Our house was transformed into a showcase of political power and social influence. Caterers moved efficiently through perfectly decorated rooms. Photographers captured every angle of Morrison family perfection, And I stood in my new dress, a conservative navy blue that my mother had chosen, feeling like an actress about to perform the role of her lifetime. Jonathan arrived early, looking every inch the ideal political son-in-law. His compliments were appropriate, his conversation polished, his attention to me perfectly calibrated to suggest romantic interest without crossing any lines of propriety. "You look beautiful tonight, Elena," he said as we posed for photographs. In the main hallway, "This dress is perfect for you." Perfect. The word that had defined my entire existence, and tonight it felt more suffocating than ever. As guests began arriving, I slipped into my familiar role: smile, make polite conversation, remember names and connections, project the image of intelligent engagement without ever saying anything that might be controversial or memorable. I was performing a version of myself that had been so carefully crafted over the years that it felt more real than my actual thoughts and feelings. But throughout the evening, I found my attention drifting to the service staff moving quietly through the crowd. I searched faces, looking for David, though I knew he wouldn't be there. The risk was too great now, with so many people who knew my family, so many cameras capturing every moment. "Elena seems distracted tonight," I overheard Mrs. Pemberton say to my mother during a lull in conversation. "Is everything all right?" "Just the normal stresses of senior year," my mother replied smoothly. "College applications, final exams, all the usual pressures. But she's handling it beautifully, as always." Handling it beautifully. Another way of saying I was continuing to comply, continuing to suppress any inconvenient emotions or desires that might disrupt the carefully maintained facade. During dinner, I found myself seated between Jonathan and Senator Aldrich, a longtime family friend who had known me since childhood. The conversation flowed around topics I was expected to engage with: college plans, summer internships, charitable activities that would look good on applications and in campaign materials. "I hear you're considering Harvard," Senator Aldrich sighed, cutting into his salmon with practiced efficiency. "Excellent choice. Political science, I assume?" "That's the plan," I replied automatically, though the words felt foreign in my mouth. "Wonderful. The connections you'll make there will serve you well. Politics is ultimately about relationships, about understanding how power flows through networks of influence and mutual benefit." As he spoke, I found myself thinking about different kinds of connections, about Mrs. Henderson, who had seen past my perfect facade to something real underneath, about David, who had challenged me to consider what I actually wanted rather than what I was supposed to want. These relationships weren't about power or influence or mutual benefit. They were about recognition, understanding, authentic human connection. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had been so focused on maintaining relationships that would serve my father's career that I had never learned how to form relationships that might serve my own growth as a person. After dinner, as guests moved to the main salon for speeches and more networking, I excused myself and slipped away to my father's study. I needed a moment alone, away from the performance, away from the constant awareness of being observed and evaluated. The study was dark and quiet, filled with the scent of leather-bound books and the faint aroma of my father's expensive cigars. I stood behind his massive desk, looking at the wall of photographs that documented his political rise: handshakes with presidents, ribbon cuttings, campaign victories, family portraits that showed our evolution from private people to public symbols. In the early photos, we looked genuinely happy. My parents appeared relaxed, affectionate with each other and with me. But as the years progressed and my father's career advanced, something changed in our expressions. The smiles became more practiced, the poses more deliberate, the sense of authentic connection gradually replaced by the polished presentation of family unity. When had we stopped being real people and become characters in my father's political narrative? I was so lost in these thoughts that I didn't hear the study door open behind me. There you are. My father's voice made me jump. Your guests are wondering where you've gone. I just needed a moment, I said, turning to face him. In the dim light from the hallway, he looked older than I remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper, the weight of constant public scrutiny evident in his posture. This is an important night, Elena. The connections you make tonight could determine your entire future. What if I don't want that future? The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I saw my father's expression shift from paternal concern to something harder, more calculating. What do you mean? I felt myself standing at the edge of a precipice. Everything I had been thinking, everything David and Mrs. Henderson had helped me understand, all of it was crystallizing into this moment. I could retreat back into compliance, or I could finally speak the truth that had been building inside me for months. I mean, what if I don't want to study political science at Harvard? What if I don't want to marry Jonathan Whitman? What if I want something different for my life? My father was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a coldness I had never heard before. Elena, you're 17 years old. You don't know what you want. You don't understand the sacrifices that have been made to give you the opportunities you have. Everything I've built, everything our family represents, depends on maintaining certain standards, certain expectations. But what about what I want? What about who I might become if I had the chance to choose for myself? Choice is a luxury we can't afford. Not at this level of public life. Every decision has consequences that extend far beyond personal preferences. The dismissal in his voice ignited something inside me that I had never felt before. Anger. Pure, clean, righteous anger at being treated like a possession rather than a person. So my entire life is supposed to be subordinated to your political ambitions? I'm supposed to marry who you choose, study what you decide, become who you need me to be, all so that you can maintain your image as a successful family man. You're being dramatic, Elena. No one is asking you to sacrifice anything. We're offering you opportunities that most people could only dream of, opportunities that I never asked for. The words echoed in the quiet study, and I saw my father's jaw tighten with the effort of maintaining his composure. Lower your voice, he said quietly. There are guests in this house, and you will not embarrass this family with an emotional outburst. Emotional outburst. As if my desire for autonomy, for the basic right to determine my own future, was nothing more than teenage hysteria. When do I get to be a person instead of a political prop? I asked, my voice shaking despite my efforts to control it. When you understand that being a Morrison means being something more than just a person, it means being a symbol, a representative of values and principles that are bigger than individual desires. And what if I don't want to be a symbol? What if I just want to be Elena? For the first time in the conversation, my father looked genuinely surprised, as if the possibility that I might reject the role he had created for me had never seriously occurred to him. Then you would be making the biggest mistake of your life, he said finally, and you would be destroying everything I've worked to build in the process. The threat was clear, and it landed with the weight of 18 years of conditioning. But for the first time, instead of immediately retreating into compliance, I found myself wondering what would actually happen if I called his bluff. Asterisk, the conversation with my father haunted me for days. His words echoed in my mind. You would be destroying everything I've worked to build. The weight of that responsibility felt crushing, but it also raised questions I had never dared ask before. Was it fair to make a 17-year-old responsible for her father's entire career? Was my compliance really necessary for his success, or was it just convenient? I began paying attention to other political families, studying how they navigated the balance between public service and private life. Some politicians' children lived relatively normal lives, pursuing their own interests while supporting their parents' careers from a comfortable distance. Others, like me, seemed to exist primarily as extensions of their parents' political person, as dot the difference. I realized wasn't in the demands of political life itself, but in how individual families chose to handle those demands. My father had made choices about how to use his family as political assets, but those weren't the only choices available. This realization came into sharp focus when Mrs. Henderson asked me to stay after class one afternoon. "How are you doing, Elena?" she asked, her voice carrying the particular tone of someone who genuinely wanted an honest answer. "I'm fine," I replied automatically, then caught myself. "Actually, I'm not fine. I'm confused and angry and scared, and I don't know what to do about any of it." "Tell me," so I did. I told her about the conversation with my father, about his insistence that my personal desires were less important than his political ambitions, about the suffocating weight of being responsible for maintaining his image of family perfection. Mrs. Henderson listened without interrupting, her expression growing more thoughtful as I spoke. "Elena," she said when I finished, "what would you do if you knew your father would be fine regardless of your choices?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if his career didn't actually depend on your compliance? What if he would be equally successful whether you studied political science or art history? Whether you married Jonathan Whitman or someone else entirely? Whether you lived the life he's planned for you or created your own path?" I stared at her, struggling to process the implications of what she was suggesting. But he said ... He said his success depends on your compliance. But is that actually true? Or is it just easier for him if you don't challenge the narrative he's created? The possibility that my father's control might be more about his comfort than his necessity had never occurred to me. I had accepted without question that my rebellion would destroy his career, but what if that was just another form of manipulation, another way to ensure my continued compliance? "How can I know for sure?" I asked. "Research," Mrs. Henderson replied. "Look at other political families. See how they handle similar situations. And ask yourself this: if your father's political success truly depended on controlling every aspect of his family's personal lives, would that be the kind of leader you'd want representing your state?" The question followed me home, and that night I did exactly what she had suggested. I spent hours researching political families, reading about politicians whose children had chosen unconventional paths, whose spouses had maintained independent careers, whose families had weathered scandals and controversies and emerged stronger for their authenticity. What I discovered was illuminating. Many successful politicians had family members who lived independently, who made choices based on personal fulfillment rather than political calculation. In fact, some voters seemed to prefer politicians whose families appeared genuine and relatable rather than artificially perfect. My father's insistence on total control wasn't necessary for his success. It was a choice he had made about how to manage his public image, and I was beginning to understand that I had the power to make different choices about how to live my own life. Armed with this new understanding, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. I was going to apply to the University of Florence program that David had shown me. Not instead of Harvard. I wasn't quite ready for that level of direct defiance, but in addition to it, I would give myself options, alternatives, the possibility of a different future, even if I wasn't yet brave enough to choose it. The application process had to be conducted in complete secrecy. I used David's computer to fill out forms, met with Mrs. Henderson after school to review my essays, and had my transcripts sent from a address I created specifically for this purpose. Every step felt like an act of rebellion, small but significant moves toward claiming ownership of my own life. How does it feel? David asked one afternoon as we reviewed my application essay in the empty school library. Terrifying, I admitted, but also exciting. Like I'm finally doing something that's actually mine, not just something I'm supposed to do. You don't have to choose Florence, right? Just applying, just giving yourself the option, that's already a huge step. I looked at him, this boy who had challenged me to imagine a different life, and felt a surge of affection so strong it almost overwhelmed me. Why does my happiness matter so much to you? David was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than usual. Because I care about you. Not Senator Morrison's daughter, not the perfect political prop, but you, Elena, the person who likes storm blue oceans and has opinions about colonial history and laughs when she forgets to calculate the social impact. First, the simplicity of his answer took my breath away. When was the last time someone had cared about me just for being myself? I care about you too, I whispered, and for the first time, I allowed myself to consider what it might mean to build a relationship based on mutual understanding rather than political advantage. Over the next few weeks, as I waited to hear back from Florence, I began making other small changes. I started expressing opinions in class, even when they differed from the expected responses. I chose books to read for pleasure rather than just for academic credit. I took long walks alone, without destination or purpose, just to experience. The freedom of unscheduled time, each small act of autonomy felt like a victory, but they also made the constraints of my regular life more apparent. At home, I continued to play my assigned role: dutiful daughter, perfect student, ideal political asset. But now I was conscious of the performance in ways I had never been before. Aware of the gap between who I was becoming and who I was expected to be, the tension was becoming unsustainable. I could feel myself approaching another crossroads, another moment when I would have to choose between continued compliance and authentic self-expression. And this time, I wasn't sure I could choose compliance, even if it meant disappointing. Everyone who had invested in the idea of perfect Elena Morrison. The acceptance letter from Florence arrived on a Tuesday in March, hidden in a stack of college promotional materials that I intercepted before my parents could see them. I opened it in my bedroom with shaking hands, hardly daring to hope. "Dear Miss Morrison," it began, "we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into our art history and cultural studies program." I read the letter 3 times before the reality sunk in. I had been accepted. I had options. For the first time in my life, I had created a possibility that existed entirely outside my parents. Plans for my future dot the next few days passed in a haze of secret excitement and growing anxiety. I carried the letter with me everywhere, hidden in my school bag like a talisman of possibility. But I also became increasingly aware of how limited my time was to make a decision. Florence required a response by May 1st, and Harvard's acceptance had already been confirmed for months. Soon, I would have to choose not just between 2 universities, but between 2 completely different versions of my future self. The pressure reached a breaking point during what was supposed to be a routine family dinner. My parents were discussing summer internship opportunities, mapping out my schedule between high school graduation and my freshman year at Harvard with the efficiency of military strategists. "The Henderson Foundation has offered you a position," my mother said, consulting her ever-present notebook. "It would look excellent on your resume, and Senator Henderson's daughter will be working there as well. You could strengthen that connection. And I've arranged for you to shadow me at the Capitol for 2 weeks in July," my father added. "It will give you practical experience in legislative operations." They were planning my summer, my college years, my entire future, and I was expected to sit there nodding and smiling and expressing gratitude for opportunities. I had never requested, what if I wanted to do something different this summer? I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. My parents looked at me with identical expressions of surprise. Different how? My mother asked. Travel, maybe? See Europe before starting college. Elena, that's not practical, my father said dismissively. You need to be building relevant experience, making connections that will serve your future career. What? If I don't want the future career you've planned for me? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I saw my father's expression shift from paternal patience to something harder, more threatening. We've discussed this before. You're too young to understand what you're giving up. I'm 18 years old. I'm old enough to vote, to serve in the military, to make legal decisions for myself. When do I become old enough to have opinions about my own life? When you demonstrate the maturity to understand that your individual preferences are less important than your responsibilities to this family. The dismissal in his voice triggered something inside me that I had been suppressing for too long. 18 years of compliance, of swallowing my own desires, of being treated like a possession rather than a person, all of it crystallized into a moment of perfect, furious clarity. I stood up from the table, the Florence acceptance letter burning like a secret fire in my pocket. I'm not your political prop, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. I'm not an extension of your campaign strategy. I'm a person with my own thoughts and feelings and dreams, and I have the right to make my own decisions about my future. Sit down, Elena. My father's voice carried the authority of 18 years of unquestioned obedience, but for the first time in my life, I didn't sit down. No, I said. I won't sit down, and I won't be quiet, and I won't keep pretending that your political ambitions are more important than my right to determine my own life. I pulled the Florence letter from my pocket and placed it on the table between us. I've been accepted to the University of Florence. Art history and cultural studies, I'm going. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents stared at the letter like it was a bomb that had just detonated in their carefully ordered world. You applied to colleges without our knowledge? My mother whispered, her voice carrying a mixture of shock and betrayal. I applied to one college. One alternative to the future you've planned for me without my input. My father picked up the letter, his face growing darker as he read. This is completely unacceptable, he said finally. You will not be attending this program. You will be attending Harvard as we agreed. We never agreed. You decided, and I complied, but I'm done complying. Elena, you're being ridiculous. Art history in Italy? This isn't a serious academic pursuit. It's an expensive vacation masquerading as education. It's what I want to study. It's what interests me. For the first time in my life, I'm making a choice based on what I actually care about rather than what will look good in your campaign materials. My father crumpled the letter in his fist, and I felt something final and irreversible happening in that gesture. You are not going to Italy, he said, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. You are going to Harvard. You are studying political science, and you are going to stop this adolescent rebellion before you destroy everything I've worked to build. I looked at him, this man who had shaped every aspect of my life, who had never once asked what I wanted or who I might become given the chance to choose for myself. And I felt the last threads of my compliance finally snap. Then I guess I'll be destroying it, I said quietly, because I'm done living my life for your political career. The aftermath of that dinner was swift and brutal. Within hours, my father had mobilized every resource at his disposal to contain what he clearly viewed as a crisis of family discipline. My phone was taken away, my computer access restricted, my car keys confiscated. I was effectively under house arrest, isolated from any outside influence that might reinforce my rebellious ideas, but the most painful consequence was the look of devastation on my mother's face. After my father had stormed out to make damage control phone calls, she sat across from me in our formal living room, her perfect composure finally cracking. "How could you do this to us?" she whispered, tears making tracks down her carefully made-up cheeks. "After everything we've sacrificed, everything we've built, dot, dot, dot." "What about what I've sacrificed?" I asked, though my anger was tempered by seeing her genuine distress. "When did anyone ask what I wanted to build? You don't understand the pressure. Elena, the scrutiny. Every mistake is magnified. Every family crisis becomes public fodder for our enemies. We were trying to protect you. From what? From having choices? From making my own decisions? From being human?" My mother was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was so soft I had to lean forward to hear her. "From making the mistakes I made." The admission hung between us, heavy with implications I was only beginning to understand. "What mistakes, Mom?" She looked toward the doorway, making sure my father wasn't within earshot, then turned back to me with an expression I had never seen before: raw, unguarded honesty. "I had dreams too once. I wanted to be a teacher, maybe a writer. I had opinions about politics, about social issues, about the kind of world I wanted to help create. But when I married your father, all of that became dot, dot, complicated, inconvenient, politically risky." She paused, her hands twisting in her lap. "I told myself I was making sacrifices for the greater good, that supporting his career was a worthy use of my life. And maybe it was, but somewhere along the way, I forgot who I used to be. I became so focused on being the perfect political wife that I lost track of Margaret, the person who existed before I became Mrs. Senator Morrison." The confession broke my heart and validated every fear I had been carrying about my own future. "Is that why you want me to marry Jonathan? To study political science? Because it's the safe path? Because I thought it would protect you from the kind of regret that keeps you awake at night, wondering who you might have been if you'd been brave enough to fight for yourself?" I stared at my mother, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Not as the perfect political wife, but as a woman who had made choices she wasn't entirely at peace with, who had sacrificed her own dreams for what she believed was the greater good. "But Mom," I said gently, "what if fighting for myself is exactly what I need to do to avoid those regrets?" She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see the conflict playing out across her features, the protective mother who wanted to shield me from difficulty warring with the woman who understood the cost of surrendering your authentic self. "Your father will never accept this," she said finally. "If you defy him on something this fundamental, he'll see it as a betrayal of everything he's built our family around. Then maybe what he's built isn't worth preserving." The words seemed to shock both of us. I had never directly criticized my father's choices before, never questioned whether his way of organizing our lives was actually beneficial for anyone except him. "Elena," my mother said carefully, "you need to understand what you're risking. Not just the financial support, though that's significant, but the relationships, the connections, the entire social world you've grown up in. If you reject the path your father has laid out, you'll be walking away from all of it. Maybe that's exactly what I need to do." Over the next few days, while I remained effectively imprisoned in my own home, I had time to think about my mother's warning. Was I prepared to lose everything I had ever known? Was my desire for autonomy worth the cost of alienating my family? Losing my financial security, starting over with nothing but my own determination to guide me? The questions might have paralyzed me with doubt, but something had fundamentally changed during that dinner confrontation. For the first time in my life, I had spoken my truth aloud, had claimed ownership of my own decisions, and the sky hadn't fallen. My father was angry, my mother was upset, but the world had continued spinning. The consequences, while serious, were survivable. More importantly, I had glimpsed what it felt like to act from authenticity rather than compliance. And that brief taste of freedom had made it impossible to return to my old patterns of submission. 3 days into my house arrest, David found a way to contact me. A folded note appeared on my bedroom windowsill. He must have climbed the old oak tree that grew close to the house. The same tree I had used as a child when I wanted to feel like I was escaping, even briefly, from the constraints of Morrison family expectations. Elena, the note read, I heard what happened. Mrs. Henderson told me about the Florence acceptance. She's proud of you for applying. And so am I. I know you're probably scared, but remember what you told her about what you wanted. Remember that your life belongs to you. If you need help, if you need anything, leave a note in the hollow of the oak tree. You're braver than you know. Reading his words, I felt less alone than I had since the confrontation with my parents. Someone understood what I was trying to do. Someone believed I had the right to make my own choices. Someone saw my rebellion as courage rather than selfishness. That night, I wrote my own note and left it in the tree. I'm scared, but I'm not backing down. Thank you for helping me remember who I am underneath all the expectations. The secret correspondence continued for several days. A lifeline of support that helped me maintain my resolve, even as the pressure from my family intensified. My father had moved from anger to strategic planning, outlining the consequences of my selfish choices with the methodical precision of a political campaign targeting an opponent. Harvard has been informed that you're dealing with a family crisis and may need to defer enrollment, he announced during one of our increasingly frequent family meetings, interrogations, really designed to wear down my resistance. I've also spoken with the Florence program. They understand that you applied without proper family consultation and are prepared to release you from any obligations. You contacted Florence? You had no right. I had every right. You're still a minor in this household, and I'm still responsible for your decisions until you prove you can make mature ones. Mature ones meaning ones you approve of? Mature ones meaning ones that consider the broader implications beyond your immediate desires. But I could see something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Uncertainty. For 18 years, his authority had been absolute and unquestioned. Now, faced with sustained resistance for the first time, he seemed genuinely unsure about how to proceed. This uncertainty became more apparent as the days passed. His attempts to control the situation were becoming increasingly desperate, increasingly heavy-handed. He had Mrs. Henderson removed as my advisor, claiming concerns about her inappropriate influence. He scheduled daily meetings with a family therapist, a woman who specialized in bringing wayward political families back into line rather than exploring authentic personal growth. But each heavy-handed tactic only reinforced my growing conviction that I was making the right choice. A father confident in his decisions wouldn't need to isolate me from every source of alternative perspective. A family system built on genuine love and mutual respect wouldn't require such authoritarian measures to maintain itself. The final confrontation came 2 weeks before graduation. My father had arranged what he called a family summit, a meeting that included not just my parents, but also key campaign advisors, family friends, and Jonathan Whitman himself. The message was clear. This wasn't just about my individual choices anymore, but about my obligations to an entire network of people who had invested in the Morrison family brand. Walked into our formal dining room to find 8 adults seated around the polished mahogany table, their expressions ranging from concerned to stern to openly disapproving. It felt like an intervention, a tribunal, a carefully orchestrated attempt to overwhelm me into submission through sheer social pressure. Elena, my father began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he used for important political speeches. We're here because people who care about you are concerned about the decisions you're making. We want to help you understand the full implications of your choices. For the next hour, I listened as each person around the table explained why my desire for independence was misguided, selfish, potentially destructive, not just to my own future, but to everyone who had supported our family over the years. Jonathan spoke about the partnership our families could build, the mutual benefits of our alliance. Campaign advisors outlined how my rebellion could be used against my father by political opponents. Family friends shared stories of other young people who had made similar mistakes and lived to regret them. It was masterfully orchestrated, designed to make me feel small and selfish and overwhelmingly outnumbered. But as I sat there listening to these adults discuss my life as if I weren't in the room, as if my thoughts and feelings and desires were irrelevant data points in their political calculations, something crystallized inside me with perfect clarity. This wasn't love. This wasn't protection. This wasn't even genuine concern for my well-being. This was a desperate attempt to maintain control, to prevent me from making choices that might complicate their plans or challenge their authority. When they finished speaking, the room fell silent, everyone waiting for my response. I could feel the weight of their expectations, the pressure to capitulate, to apologize for my selfishness and return to my role as compliant daughter and political asset. Instead, I stood up. "Thank you all for your concern," I said, my voice steadier than I had expected. But I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about what's happening here. I looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. This isn't a negotiation. I'm not asking for permission to live my own life. I'm informing you that I intend to do so. My father started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. I'm 18 years old. In 6 months, I'll be legally an adult with the right to make my own decisions about my education, my career, my relationships, my future. I can make those decisions with your support and understanding, or I can make them despite your opposition. But I will make them. I paused, looking directly at my father. I love this family, but I won't sacrifice my authentic self to maintain your political image. I won't marry someone I don't love to strengthen your campaign connections. I won't study subjects that don't interest me to fulfill your vision of who I should become. The silence in the room was absolute. I've been accepted to the University of Florence to study art history and cultural studies. I'm going. I'll find a way to finance it myself if necessary, but I'm going. This is my choice, my life, my decision. To make, I moved toward the door, then turned back for one final statement. For 18 years, I wasn't allowed to cry only to comply. I did exactly what you asked of me, became exactly who you needed me to be, sacrificed every authentic impulse to maintain your vision of family perfection. But I'm done. I'm done being your symbol instead of your daughter. I'm done living my life for your political career instead of my own dreams. I looked at my mother, whose tears were flowing freely now. I hope someday you'll understand that this isn't a rejection of love, it's a claim for it. Real love doesn't require the complete surrender of self. Real love makes space for authentic growth, even when it's inconvenient or challenging. And with that, I walked out of the room, out of the house, and toward a future I would create for myself, one authentic choice at a time. 6 months later, I was walking through the cobblestone streets of Florence, my backpack heavy with art history, textbooks, my heart light with the knowledge that every step I took was my own choice. I have learned to cry again tears of frustration, of joy, of recognition, of grief for the girl I had been, and celebration of the woman I was becoming. I wasn't allowed to cry then. But now, finally, I was free to feel everything and free to Choose how to respond to those feelings with authenticity, courage, and hope. The real Elena had finally come home to herself.